And that was a wonderful point. With Wilsonianism, you have a very different situation. As I say, one is you have to find the aggressor and then zap him. The interesting thing, for example, in Bosnia, it's very interesting. You have to demonize one group, okay? In order to get the American suckers to intervene and the rest of the United Nations and all that, you have to have one evil demon. So the Serbs were nominated as an evil demon very early, and everybody, Serbs evil, they're ethnic cleansing, they're killing people, killing civilians and all that. But then it turns out the Croats and the Bosnians were also killing people, and they got a chance, killing civilians. That muddied the waters a little bit. See, that confused the Americans. Who's going to march in and send troops and bombers and all that if all sides are somehow bad? That's not going to fly. So the warmongers have to create a situation where the Serbs are pure evil. Somehow the devil has anointed them as evil. Everybody else are good and victims and wonderful and believers of freedom and democracy and all the other crap. And that's the... So in other words, they have to know nothing about foreign policy to really fall for this stuff, which of course most Americans don't. Which leaves a gap in the situation. So that's the the Wilsonian, vicious, pernicious Wilsonian argument that you have to find the aggressor and zap him. Okay. The other first argument is Wilsonian argument. You have to. In the United States and every other country, you've got to impose democracy and human rights throughout the world. This is even worse in a sense. In other words, you've got now a situation where, democracy and human rights don't exist very many places in the world. I don't want to disillusion many people here, but there's very few places. Very few places we have this situation. But now it's the God-given assignment for the United States to go and impose democracy throughout the world, everywhere, every place, regardless. So now you have Charles Beard, and somebody mentioned that this weekend too. Charles Beard said that the policy of stamping out aggression, collective security against aggression, is a policy of perpetual war for perpetual peace. In the pursuit of world perpetual peace, you have to keep fighting constantly. Now you have the other part of the equation, the perpetual war to impose human rights and democracy everywhere. And now you have a formula for total, unending loss of treasure and life and every that. But every conflict all over the globe in a totally impossible quest. In addition to that, the idea of using war, of imposing democracy and human rights by the sword is kind of odd anyway. And the Somalian intervention, to me, was a beautiful case study of this. To me, it's perfect. If you remember, it's a Wilsonian dream in practice. So you have a situation, and the entire left, by the way, loved it. They loved the Somalian intervention because there was no American interest at all, conceivable interest in Somalia. Nothing. No resources, no fighting against communism, nothing. Zippo. Okay. No strategic sea routes, whatever. They couldn't find anything. So the left, the allegedly anti-war left, they all love the Somalian intervention because it was, quote, purely altruistic, unquote. Because America has no interest in it, therefore it's good. That was to me, it's totally bizarre. The whole culture is crazy, and that's part of it. So now we have, when the Somalian intervention came in, we extolled, if you remember the press in that period, for a few heady months, they extolled a new kind of army, what we can call a new model army, basis, apologies to Cromwell, engaging in a new kind of high moral intervention. The U.S. soldier with a care package on one hand and a gun on the other. So we're bringing food and peace and human rights to the masses, in the meantime we're bringing a gun. So that we're bringing democracy and peace and human rights to the benighted peoples of Somalia and doing it nobly and altruistically. Well, it worked for about 2 months, if it worked that much. And then, of course, everything hits the fan. The consequences show up. And we wind up with every Somalian virtually hating the United States, shooting American soldiers, dragging their bodies through the streets and all that. Fortunately, we got out. I don't know if it's by some luck the United States got out. I think CNN or the pictures of the bodies being dragged to the streets didn't quite have the effect it was supposed to, and Americans revolted against the whole process and got out. So we have, now the interesting thing in both cases here, in both of these cases, the modern interventionists, the warmongers, the modern international law people, have won by seizing the moral high ground, very much like the environmentalists do it. It's very similar. The environmentalists, they speak for the cosmos. They speak for the rights of beaches and trees and insects and whatever, and we're just narrow human being types. Yeah, right? So they speak for the earth and everything else. And similarly here, we speak for narrow, selfish American interests. They speak for the war for democracy and human rights and peace and unending peace and all that. So they were able to seize the high moral ground, and apparently were not successfully challenged on this. In the old days, that wasn't true. In the old days, if you're an interventionist or warmonger, you're considered a propagandist for despotism, for mass murder, for perpetual war, and a spokesman for the merchants of death, a great phrase that should be revived. So a warmonger was not considered a high moral person somehow. But nowadays, of course, it's pretty simple. You just go, yes, we should kill all Serbs. This becomes the moral position. And those of us that don't want to kill all Serbs become selfish and narrow. At any rate, I bring up the cause of human rights, so-called, because this, of course, is precisely the critical argument, which, at least in retrospect, Father Abraham's war of northern aggression against the South is justified and even glorified. The humanitarian, again with a gun, with butchery in his wake, rights the wrongs of slavery by mass murder, destruction of property institutions, and wreaking havoc, which has still not disappeared. Isabel Patterson, one of the great essays on political philosophy of this century, zeroed in on what she aptly called the humanitarian or the guillotine. Those of us who read my review on Chronicles, I apologize for repeating it. I think this is great stuff. As she wrote, the humanitarian wishes, quote, wishes to be a prime mover in the lives of others. He cannot admit either the divine or the natural order by which men have the power to help themselves. The humanitarian puts himself in the place of God, unquote. But Mrs. Patterson notes the humanitarian is, quote, confronted by two awkward facts. First, that the competent do not need his assistance. And second, that the majority of the people, if unperverted, positively do not want to be done good by the humanitarian. Unquote. Having considered what the good of others might be and who is to decide on the good and on what to do about it, Mrs. Patterson points out, quote, of course what the humanitarian actually proposes is that he shall do what he thinks is good for everybody. It is at this point that the humanitarian sets up a guillotine. And she concludes the humanitarian in theory is a terrorist in action, which is exactly it, point by point, right down the line. Most of my friends and colleagues are hesitant to concede the existence of universal natural rights. I believe in natural rights. But I think one of the problems is they worry they might find themselves forced to support American or worldwide intervention to try to enforce these rights everywhere. But I think the resolution of this is the classical natural law international jurists, they weren't in favor of universal collective security or enforcement of rights. If, for example, Tutsis are slaughtering Hutus in Rwanda, or vice versa, the natural lawyers would have said, look, that's too bad. It violates the natural rights of the Hutus or Tutsis, but that doesn't mean anybody else should leap in to do something about it. Quite the contrary. We might encapsulate this position into a slogan. This is my slogan for the night. Rights may be universal, but their enforcement must be local. Or to adopt the motto of the Irish rebels, Sinn Féin, ourselves alone. We want to enforce our rights, we should do it ourselves. We're not going to expect everybody else to do it for us. We've got rights, we've got to do something about it. This, of course, was the American revolutionaries. The American revolutionaries were happy to accept French aid, but they were prepared to, they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to do it themselves. Take up arms for their rights. They didn't expect the whole world of therapists and everybody else to do it for them. So, to put it another way, I mentioned environmentalists a minute ago. I've always believed that when the loony left claims that all sorts of entities have rights, animals, alligators, trees, plants, rocks, beaches, the earth, the ecology, quote unquote, the proper response is, okay, when those entities act like Americans in the American Revolution, they set forth their declaration, and then they take up arms to support their rights, then I can take them seriously. Otherwise, shut up. Let's now turn to America's two just wars. It's plainly evident to me that the American Revolution was a just war. It was a war of peoples forming an independent nation and casting off the bonds of another people, insisting on perpetuating rule over them. Obviously, the Americans, while welcoming French support, decided to do it on their own. What I want to stress here is not so much the grievances, which are mostly taxation and whatever stemmed from it, but the fact, what were the grounds on which they stood for this solemn act of separation. The political philosophy in those days, the old-fashioned political philosophy, which was getting obsolete by the 18th century, was that the king is sovereign, the king has divine powers, everybody else is subordinate to the king, and any rebellion against the king is evil and satanic. This was basically the theory of order.